Hey, Chandler Bolt here, and joining me today is Lianne Saffer. Lianne actually worked with us at Self-Publishing School. She's a student at Self-Publishing School, also the author of her book. It's a memoir called Please Don't Send Me Flowers. She's a writer, fitness instructor, hairstylist, life coach, and advocate for helping people live a loud and authentic life. All right, so today we're going to be talking about a topic that we don't talk a lot about on the podcast. So I'm really excited to have Lianne here, which is writing. How do you write a quality memoir that actually sells, right? So two-part, like how do you write a great memoir, but then also how do you sell copies of that memoir if you're not famous, which is very hard to do. Lianne, great to have you here.
Thank you.
So, hey, why did you write this book? Why did you decide to write this book?
Oh man, kind of funny story. So I had a pretty rough few years, and then that landed me with breast cancer. And I was always using the internet to like banter with people when I was going through treatment and in my infusions and stuff. And I took a poll one day and I was like, who thinks I should write a book called Shit You Didn't Think Would Happen to You? And it was like unanimous yes, minus like maybe two people that said no. And I was like, fine, you don't have to read it. So I started just writing everything down and kind of working backwards. And I was like, you know what? There's a lot of good stuff in here, because if I would have known any of the things that I'm learning now, I would have been so much more equipped and felt so much less alone. So I was like, I'm going to just do it. I'm just going to do it.
Yeah. And then how'd you find us at Self-Publishing School?
I had written the majority of my manuscript, and then I was like, wait, I don't know what to do.
Yeah.
So I think it was like a Google search, and then had a call, and I was like, all right, this feels legit.
Cool. And then why? Because obviously that could have gone two very different routes with as far as how the book was structured. Like there could be the breast cancer survival guide, which is maybe like more of a self-help type book, versus the route that you took, which was a memoir. How'd you decide between going more self-help or more memoir?
Yeah, I'm not like a self-help fan. It doesn't work for me. It makes me feel like I'm doing something wrong, and I didn't want that for anybody else. And I knew that if I went that route, it wouldn't feel authentic. But I did have like the imposter syndrome of like, who cares about my story? Like, who am I? Little girl from Oregon. But I had read some books that had some similar themes in them, and I'm like, I feel like I have more to tell. Like, I felt like they were a little bit holding back, and whether they were or not, but I'm like, wait, there's more. And I can do this. I can share that because I've lived it.
Got it. And then what would, just on that note, because I feel like there's probably a lot of people kind of at that fork in the road, and really it's not even a black and white decision. I think it's kind of shades of gray. And it's like some memoirs are more self-help, some self-help are more memoirs, and there's kind of this spectrum. But what would be your tips for folks who are kind of at that kind of line saying, all right, do I go the memoir route? Do I go the self-help route?
I would say trust your gut. Don't do it because you think you should do it. Do it because you know you should do it. That sounded really profound, but seriously.
And then was yours just like, hey, I don't like self-help, so that's not even an option? Or were you ever like, should I do it and just do a different take on self-help?
Yeah, no, I was like, I just don't like self-help. I think I say that in part of my book. It's like, is this a self-help book? No. Will it help you? Yes. There's lessons in both ways that you write.
Got it. And now, so you said, all right, I'm going to do this. What was the toughest part of writing a book? And maybe even more specifically, what do you feel like the toughest part is of writing a memoir?
Other people, the people that you write about. That was like such a gray area for me. And I'm like, how much do I disclose? But, the whole point was to disclose everything so that people felt more seen, right? And it was relatable. And that was really, really hard for me. I'm like, how do I do this with grace while also being truthful? And there are still lessons about that post writing it. But yeah, I would say that was the hardest part. I really enjoyed writing it. It was very therapeutic for me.
And so how did you do it with grace while still being truthful?
I don't know that I did it with grace. After I published it, there was like a little bit of hard conversation with some of the people mentioned. Not mentioning any names was very helpful. And then a couple people I was like, hey, I wrote this. You need to read it before I put it out there, and that was the best that I could do, because I'm like, yeah, it's your story, but it's my story to tell too. So,
Uh,
yeah.
and how did you navigate that? Because I feel like that is very tough for a lot of people.
Yeah.
So how did you navigate kind of the interpersonal relationship piece? And sometimes it can be like, oh, I need to pull this out because I'm worried about having a tough conversation, but that means the book is worse. Versus if I put this in the book, it is going to be more helpful for the reader. But now I've all of a sudden got hand grenades kind of blowing up in my personal life. Like, how did you balance that? And then how did you navigate those tough conversations?
Yeah, I think what I had to really sit back and realize was that, like, everybody can look at an apple, right? You and I are staring at an apple, and the side of the apple that you see is going to look a little bit different than the side of the apple that I see, but it's still an apple. So, they might remember it a tiny bit differently. I might have felt it a tiny bit differently. And so I had to just like take that as my North Star. But it did come down to, I had done everything but published the book before I brought this up, specifically with my ex that I wrote about. And I was like, dude, I can't publish it until we have this conversation. And so I was like, here are the things that I wrote about, and I hope you understand why I wrote this. And it's not to make you look bad, it's to share my story. And I'm glad we had this experience, because look where we are now. And so it was just about having those conversations, and it was hard, but it all worked out.
Did you ever have people threaten to sue you or say, hey, don't publish this or anything like that?
No, I mean, no. And I think what was beneficial to me is I had so much like documentation of these things that happened. So I'm like, this is what happened. And it wasn't slanderous in any way. And I made sure of that with my editor, and read over what could possibly happen.
Yeah.
So yeah, but that's hard.
What conclusion did you come to with that? Like, it sounds like you decided not to use names, which I'm assuming that was intentional. What's the why behind that decision? And then were there any other decisions like that you felt, hey, I can tell the story, but then also protect myself from legal recourse, make sure that it's not slander or things like that?
Yeah, like that little blip in the beginning of the book that's like, hey, my memory works this way, yours might work that way. So just that extra protection, I think, is really important. And it took me a long time to word that to where I felt like I was covered on all areas. And yeah, removing names. And I wanted to do that for everybody's, people that know us clearly know who we're talking about here, but nobody needs to know who this person is. It doesn't actually matter. It's the story that matters.
Yeah. Got it. Did you ever consider keeping names the same, or was that from the start just kind of like hey, this is a simple thing to protect myself?
No, I never even considered it. Yeah.
Got it. And from your research, I guess anything else that comes to mind, because we get asked this all the time, these type of questions. And so my hope is to make this to be a resource that we can point people back to who are writing memoirs. And so anything else that you saw or learned in the process that you're like, hey, I did this to dot my I's and cross my T's legally up front?
Every state has different laws on how somebody can come up after you or whatever. And I didn't realize that. So I did reach out to a lawyer at one point, and I was like, hey, what's the worst that can happen? And they were great. They were like, don't pay me. Look at this website. You'll get all the answers you need. If you're still confused, come back. And that was really helpful for me, because I think I had just like researched what could possibly happen. And that's terrifying. But in Oregon, like they have some they protect your freedom of speech very, very much. So that was good to know, is that like, look for your specific state where you're publishing. And it does make a difference.
That's a great tip. And of course, this is not legal advice. Disclaimer.
Yeah, I'm not a lawyer.
Your own legal counsel. Oh man. So what would be kind of from this process, what would be tips that you have for other people who are writing a memoir on how to write a higher quality book?
Hmm. I would say use your voice very authentically. The feedback that I've gotten on my book was like, it was so relatable. I didn't use these huge words that I normally wouldn't use in conversation. It kind of sounds like you're maybe reading my diary, or like I'm telling you a story over cocktails or over coffee. And that's what I wanted. I want it to be really relatable. So however you speak in normal life and tell stories, I would say right from there.
Mm, got it. And you said use your voice. What if I don't know my voice? Like, how do I find my voice? Because I think for a lot of people that it can be a difference between, oh, I'm speaking to someone versus I am writing something. Any tips on finding your voice specifically with the writing of the book?
I would hire a life coach.
Mhm.
I would take some time to get in touch with who you are, and your why, because I I think we've all read those books where we're like, this feels a little off, like something feels a little
Mm,
surfacey, and then you put it down, because it doesn't land. And it's
mm,
just like having a conversation that feels a little surfacey and fake.
mhm,
So, I would say don't write until you know exactly who you are, why you're doing it, and where your voice is coming from.
mhm,
My voice came a little bit from like frustration,
mhm.
and a little bit from like, this could happen to you, so like an urgency, like I need you to
Oh,
know.
interesting. Yeah,
And also a place of like teaching, like
yeah.
I want to teach us all to be better in these situations, right?
Mm, yeah, that's great. Yeah, how did you decide? Well, actually, yeah, different question first. You talked about pulling from kind of 3 to 5 books or kind of like stylistically that you liked. How did
Mhm.
you do that without compromising your voice? Because I remember my first book, it's like I had 3 or 4 books that I liked. I'm like, okay, I don't really know what my voice is. Like, I'll just write like Tim Ferriss, I guess, or like these books that I liked at the time. And the result was just like this jumbled mess of a book that like really wasn't me. And it definitely wasn't my voice. So how did you strike that balance between, all right, I'm taking inspiration from this style of book, but I'm keeping it in my actual voice and finding my voice kind of along the way?
Yeah, I think I had gotten the advice to read a lot of memoirs before I wrote mine, and during.
Ah. Hmm.
I actually didn't like that advice. I found that it was confusing for me because I'm like, oh my God, this book sold this many copies. I need it to like sound more like this. So I actually put them all down, and I just like was like, you know what? I'm going to do it my way. And then I'm going to have somebody proofread it and tell me if they like it, because I'm really sarcastic. I'm making jokes, and like, no, that's not going to land with everybody, but I'm not going to filter that out. If you don't understand sarcasm, you probably don't understand my book. That's okay. I'm not for everybody. But there were a couple people that I like follow on Instagram that have written amazing memoirs where, I maybe read half of it before, and I'm like, this is going to alter my perception and my voice. I'm going to finish this after. And I'm so glad that I did that. And I'm not sure that that's like the right advice for everybody, but it was the right advice for me, because I could see where I was like, oh, this worked for them. Like, did she write that or did I write that?
Mm. And so that's how you balanced, okay, I know the style that I want, but I'm keeping integrity of my voice.
Yeah. And like, this is my audience. They have the same audience. I relate to this person in this way, but I'm also different in this way. And I'm going to run with that.
Got it. That makes
Yeah.
sense. How did you decide how much to share and
Mhm.
where the line is between, okay, is this oversharing? Is this too surface level? Is this like, I want this to be known as part of my story, but this isn't helpful for the reader? Like, how did you just kind of discern between all that?
So my like first draft was like the size of the Bible. It was because I was like, I can't decide this until I literally get it all out. And so I wrote everything out. And then I went back through, and my wife went through it with me, and we were like picking apart things that maybe didn't need to be shared, for them to understand the severity of the situation or the learning, or the emotion, right? And I think that was really helpful, because I think that if I had skipped over some of that stuff initially, I probably would have skipped over some of the nuggets that were really important too.
Interesting.
So I kind of worked backwards.
So you said, I'm going to share all of it, and then I'm going to cut back to what's most essential.
Yeah, I literally printed out every single piece of paper, because I'm not a computer person, and we laid them on the ground all throughout my house.
Yeah.
And we just like
Wow.
started crossing things out.
Yeah.
And it was like so helpful, because I'm such a visual, but
Yeah.
you did start to see where like, okay, you're a little ranty here. Like
Mm,
this
mm,
actually doesn't need to be shared. You made that point over here.
yeah. Do you remember how many words you got up to, and then how many words you ended with about?
I think I think I ended at like 87,000.
Okay. Yeah.
I think I was like 130.
Oh,
140.
wow.
Yeah, it
Oh,
was a
oh my
lot. My coach was like, yeah, no, you're not going to do that. It's like, okay.
Yeah.
But you don't know. Like,
Yeah.
I didn't know how many words were in a memoir. Like,
Yeah.
but that was going to be too long of a book.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Well, and I mean, I mean, probably 30,000 to 30,000 to 100,000 words is probably the general range, and that's a wide range, obviously, because it can be a wide range. But I will say, I really love that you did that and went all the way and then cut back. And this is what we recommend for students and for people all the time. And I'm in the process of publishing a second edition, or I just finished it this morning, for the second edition of my book published. And so for that book, just for more context for people, that book went up to, I want to say about 80. I started at 50,000 words first edition, then went up to 83,000 words for the draft, and then I just got it this morning before shipping it, just under 63,000 words. So trimming 20,000 words. It sounds like in your case, it was, what was that? 40, 50,000?
Yeah.
Yeah, which is hard. That's hard to do. So kudos to you for doing that, because it can feel like, man, I'm cutting so much, but it really makes for a much better book to write past the target, but then also to cut it down. And it just feels like I don't know if you experience this, but as you go through it, it's just like with everything that you delete, it's like, oh man, awesome. This is now a better book. Like, it's hard. You're like, I don't want to delete that. I feel like this is necessary, but then the book ends up getting better.
Yeah, it really, I feel like, tightens it up. So
yeah, that's awesome. I guess kind of bridging into from what I want to bridge from the writing to the marketing. But before I do, any other tips on writing a great memoir, or things that you learned that be kind of specific to memoirs for people?
don't overthink it. For sure. I think that that's probably what everybody does when they're writing a book. I've never written another book, just the memoir, but I think that's where you kind of drown out on the truth, is if you overthink it. So
got it.
Yeah.
Now, kind of transitioning from writing to marketing. So I feel like you did a great job, and I feel like this is rare. You did a great job of focusing on themes with your book. And I think both to make the book more impactful, but also to make it more marketable. And so just even in the marketing, it's like, I haven't read the book yet, but in the book description, in the blurb, and that it's like, oh, I know what the book's about and the type of person that like, either if I was in that category, it'd be like, I want to read that book. Right. And so it's just like, I know who that ideal avatar is and all that. How do you kind of land on those themes as writing the book? And then how did you parlay that into kind of using those themes to better market the book?
Yeah, the themes was really hard for me. That was definitely really hard, because I'm like, I don't want this to be another book about breast cancer, or I don't want this to be another book about this. But I think that also comes down to like the voice, and there's so much learned, like, the section that gets the most praise is like what not to say to a cancer patient. And like, people don't really talk about that. They're like, what do? You send them flowers, whatever. Like, my editor was so helpful, who I found through your guys' Rolodex. Her name's Val Cerberich, and she's amazing, but she was really helpful and kind of whittling down the themes. But I did write the book in 3 sections. It was like, okay, married to like a very abusive partner, fell in love with a woman, but I'm not gay. And then, like it was diagnosed with breast cancer. It was like, boom, boom, boom. So like, there's your kind of like columns of themes. And then it was like, okay, what are the learnings here that people can tap into? So I kind of went like big to small again. Right. But having my editor to bounce all that off of, because she had clearly read it, was so helpful.
And how did you even land on those three themes? Because I think it'd be so easy for people to just write a meandering story of their life and not say theme 1, theme 2, theme 3. How'd you land on that?
Well, I think it's because the way my life played out, because it was literally 1 year after the other. Like these things like landed in front of me where I'm like, holy shit, when am I going to get a break? Yeah. So it was just kind of like a 3-part thing, but I do think that it helped to kind of like compartmentalize them, but there was a flow because it all did happen so fast and they all bled into each other.
Got it. That makes sense. And then how did that kind of transition or translate into how you marketed the book?
Yeah. Well, that's a really good question. I think all of these themes have happened to somebody or will happen to somebody or have happened to somebody that they know. Like we all know somebody that's been in an abusive relationship or it's happened to us. We all know somebody that's been diagnosed with cancer or we will. We all know somebody that's like fallen in love with the same sex or we will, and so that made it really easy for marketing purposes because it was like, I want you to know that I see you. And I also want you to be equipped when this is in your life, whether it's you, somebody else, your kid, your sister, your mom, your brother, whatever. And so I think that made it really easy for marketing purposes because everyone was like, oh, you're right. Like, and when I'm talking about cancer, there's so much in there for the caregiver. There's so much in there for the nurse that's taking care of you. It's not just for somebody that has breast cancer. There's so much learning for the people around you or like the people that are sending gifts. They're like, oh my God, I had no idea that we shouldn't send F cancer coloring books. You're like, they're terrible. Don't send those.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, it's in the title, but just the whole flowers thing until like a few months ago, I was like, wait, what? Oh my gosh.
Yeah. I mean, and if you read about it, you're like, well, that makes sense. Like, okay,
How did you, I think 2 parts as it relates to marketing. How did you theme 3 seemingly disparate like topics into one book with kind of like the title and the branding for the book, but then also how do you balance those 3 themes in the marketing? Do you lean more towards one of the 3? Do you market all 3? Like, how does that work?
Yeah, I think, it was easy for me to have all these things and have them flow as one book because the underlying theme was like, you can still live like a very joyful, impactful life when all this shit is happening to you. Right. So that made it easy to carry it through. As far as the marketing piece goes, what was the second part of that question?
Yeah. And so how do you market the book essentially? Like, do you only talk about one theme in a typical interview and then do like that is the hook for the book and then check out the book and learn more? Do you try to market to all 3 themes? Like, how does that work with the marketing?
Yeah, it's funny. Like when I've been doing podcasts and stuff and a lot of people just want to talk about cancer and I'm like, oh, no. There's things that lead up to cancer. I was stressed out. This is what happened. And the more that I've talked about it, the more it's like kind of branched out into these other pieces. I will say, I'm bald on the cover of the book. So I think people just assume one thing. But I just talked about it all. I've very openly talked about it all, especially, falling in love with a woman when you're like a straight person, because the world doesn't understand that you don't like, it's not always just black and white. It's not always just gay and straight. And I'm like, let me explain this to you. And that's been really eye-opening for people. So it's been really easy to market that because they're like, oh, I guess I know someone like that. And I guess I shouldn't say that or whatever. So it's been kind of fun too. Cause I'm like, hi, let's have this conversation.
It's disruptive. It's uncomfortable.
Yeah. Like not to like, I don't want to make anyone feel bad, but like, let's have this conversation about this topic because also, and I say this a lot in the book, is like, I used to say those things, or I used to do those things until it happened to me. So like, let's work together to be better here.
Well, and you can bring awareness without bringing shame.
Totally.
And when you do that, that creates conversations, and then conversations where the centerpiece is the book, as almost like an awareness tool, just kind of feeds the whole thing. Which is really cool. Let's talk about launch. How'd you launch the book? What went well? And what sold the most copies?
Oh man. Okay. So my launch was like a total disaster, and I actually love it. It worked out perfectly when I look back at it. But, I did the whole launch team thing and gathered my people, and I was going to launch on the first of the year, even though everyone told me not to, but I was like, I'm a rebel. Like, let me just do it. I wasn't planning on X amount of sales. I'm like, I just want to get this out there and let it breathe. And one of the girls, they tell you to launch it like X amount of hours because it takes a while, whatever. So it went live on the 31st. And then one of the girls on my launch team posted something on Instagram that like, oh my God, it's live. And then all these people started posting about it. And like, I got my copy. And I'm like, shit, it's only 99 cents or it's free or whatever. And everyone's like, did you know it's so cheap? And I'm like, oh my God, what is happening? But it all happened so fast. I didn't know what to do. I was like, do I raise the price? Do I keep it? And so I just kind of let it do its thing. It was like New Year's Day, and I'm like shaking because I don't know what's going on. And I had gone to prom in high school with Justin Baldoni, who is now like a very successful Hollywood person who's friends with Glennon Doyle. So he talked about my book, and then she talked about my book, and I was like, oh my God, what is happening? And this is all within the first 24 hours. And I'm like,
oh,
it's 99 cents. Like,
yeah.
So, I don't know that it would have I think it would have panned out that way had it gone to plan, but thanks to Chelsea, who let everyone know it was available. I was like, oh my God, I'm not ready.
Thanks, Chelsea.
Yeah, thanks, Chelsea. She was like, my bad. I'm like, okay.
Oh,
but what are you gonna do?
Funny. That's so funny. So where did you go from there? Like, did you, I know you said you just kind of rolled with it, but did you regroup and then have an official launch day? Did you kind of bump up all the launch stuff? Like, what did that look like?
I think everything went out the window because I was like, wait, I'm not equipped for the plan B or the failure here. So I had to get my feet, and I think I went in and raised the price 2 days later. My reviews weren't working because I think everybody had done it at once. And I'm like, well, so I just started talking about, and I used Instagram a lot, talking to everybody that was posting like, oh my God, please leave a review, la da da. This is so important. But it was a lot of my marketing was just reposting reviews or messages that people sent me, because the first 4 months, it was nonstop. Which was really fun. But I was like, oh my God, I didn't know the impact this would have. I hoped, but I maybe thought 100 people. And here we are over 1,000. I was like, what is happening? So that was really cool. But I think that was really helpful for people to see. And I did a lot of getting on live, a lot of podcasts, but I never did it another launch or anything. It's just kind of been there. This thing.
And so I guess post-launch, what do you feel like you've done that sold the most copies?
I think it's honestly just more talking about it than anything. I've done a couple, I did a book signing, which was really fun. People love that. And I was like, I didn't know if people were going to come. It was COVID. But you find that people that have read it and love it, they really want to come thank you, and they want to buy more, and they want to get it signed. And that was really fun. The podcasts are really fun. I'm not sure how much it drives my sales. I honestly think it's just more talking about it, being in front of people. I've talked to a lot of nurses who have wanted to buy it for their teams.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Got it. We should talk after this. You should check out, there's a chapter in my new book about relaunches. I think that could work really, really well for you. But then also how do you layer in a bunch of different stuff with that of book signings, virtual book tours, like a bunch of different things. Have you launched in, do you have in all three formats, or is it ebook, print?
Ebook and print. I thought a while about doing an audiobook. I haven't done it, and I have a woman that I was going to work with, but I was like, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't listen to audiobooks, so to me, I'm like, why would you do an audiobook? But I know there's a market for that too.
And this is an aside, but I would highly recommend creating an audiobook, and I would, in this case, recommend reading it yourself. I mean, people buy books differently, right? And so it's, some people would never read a book, but they would listen to your audiobook, right? And then some people like you, it's like, oh, I'm never listening to audiobooks, but I'd read your book. And so you just open up a whole new market of sales. And what you could do here is you could record the audiobook and launch the audiobook, and that audiobook launch is kind of a relaunch for the whole. Then it just spikes sales to print, to ebook, to all the things.
Well, I have been told I have a radio voice, so I will read my voice. I will read my book in my voice.
Oh yeah, it's great. It's great. I agree. I thought you were gonna say, I was like, I've been told I have a face for radio.
Yeah, totally.
Hey, so you mentioned reviews, and obviously you said you were very intentional about that as part of, on social and stuff like that. At the time of recording this interview, you're at 259 reviews on Amazon, which is no small feat, especially for memoir. Anything else you did that worked well for getting reviews?
No, I asked a lot the first 6 months. Anybody that sent me any message, I was like, thank you so much. If you have the time, please write a review or at least rate it. But I don't read my reviews. I read them until the time I got a bad one. And I was like, you know what? That's not why I wrote this book. So I would love to get more too. I just kind of stopped talking about it, but I honestly think the best thing is to just be humble and ask for them. There's no shame in asking. And if somebody really likes it, they're happy to do that for you. It takes 2 seconds.
That's great. Ask. I mean, it sounds simple, and especially, I'm sure it sounds like you do this, which is the one thing we always recommend, is when someone reaches out with positive feedback on your book, say, hey, would you mind just copying and pasting that here?
Yeah.
With a, I mean, it's so simple, and it makes it easier for them, and they've already done the hard work of creating the review. But then one thing you mentioned, which I think is super important, and this is why we celebrate negative reviews, because it's a rite of passage, right? And you'll see people post in the community, it's like, just got my first 1-star review. Because it's a book without any 1-star reviews is a book that hasn't sold well. And so that's you're expanding your reach with your book. But I remember one thing that my brother told me way back is, he said, Chandler, this is a review on your book. This is not a review on Chandler Bolt as a person. This is a review on something you created, which is still stings.
However, I will say, from a memoir point of view, it does kind of feel like it's a review on you.
Oh, interesting.
The one that I read anyway, it was like, she was brash or whatever. And I'm like, ooh. But then again, she doesn't understand sarcasm. But it's interesting to get a review on a memoir, because I'm like, you're reviewing my real lived experiences in my life. And I'm not sure how I feel about that. Like, if you don't like it, sorry, that's what happened. Like, that was, it's an interesting thing to think about, but I was like, I don't think I need to read these, but
do you think they're reviewing your experiences, or they're reviewing how it was told and how that landed with them?
Oh yeah. I mean, it's totally about the other person, right? I'm like, that's something struck you, which I'm actually glad, because it made you think. This isn't about me, but the way that you wrote it was kind of about me. And that, I think that can be kind of hard. So I don't know how healthy it is to read reviews for memoirs. Especially, my goal wasn't to like become a famous author or anything. My goal is to help people. So I'm like, I do think that if I got a negative review, it did help her in some way, because she had to think about something, right? But absolutely, it was about her. It wasn't about me. But the way that they write them, you're like, that feels like it was totally directed at my character.
Oh, no doubt. Switching gears a little bit, kind of in the home stretch here, a couple final questions. What was the most helpful part or the biggest takeaway from working with us at Self-Publishing School?
The most helpful part for sure was like the people that you're assigned to. What do you call them? Like my buddy,
Coaches. Yeah.
my coach, my buddy system.
Yeah.
I loved working with Marcy. She was incredible. And also being able to like find my editor there was so helpful. And also just the steps of how you go through that home stretch. Because, you know, I had pretty much written the thing when I signed up with you guys, and then I was totally lost. So just being like, this happens next, this happens next, this is the tool you need. I would have had no idea. So that was super helpful.
That's great. What would be your parting piece of advice for someone who's kind of the Lianne from whatever it was a year and some change ago, who's thinking about writing a memoir, knowing what you know now? What would your advice be to those folks?
It's a lot of work. It's a lot of work. It's totally worth it. My advice would be figure out your why you're writing it, and be very, very in tune with the voice behind your why. And if you're not there yet, get there first. I think it'll make a huge difference in who you impact and how you sell.
Awesome. Lianne, this has been awesome. Really, really, really helpful.
Thank you.
In closing, where can people go to find out more about you, to buy your book, to check out your book and what you're up to?
The book's on Amazon and wherever books are sold. Please don't send me flowers. Website is liannesaffer.com, and I'm Lianne Saffer on Instagram because that's my name.
All right. Please don't send me flowers. And that's the title of the book. I guess she's maybe also asking you not to send her flowers. But you can go buy the book on Amazon and check it out. Please don't send me flowers. Lianne, thank you so much.
Thank you.